Okay, everyone, let's think about this scenario. So, let's say you talk with your classmates and you discover that there is a relationship between how much someone studies for a test and their grade on that test. Let's say that you collect the following information. Oh boy, hold on a second. Let's say that you collect the following information right here. A person who studies for 0 hours got a score of 45. Studied for 1 hour, score of 60. Someone studied for 2 hours, got a score of 70. Someone studied for 3 hours, got a score of 85. Someone studied for 4 hours, got a score of 90. And finally, one person who studied for 5 hours got a score of 100, a perfect score. Okay, so this is a functional relationship, okay? This is a functional relationship. And let's think about what is the input in this case and what is the output. What determines what? Is it the case that what you got as a score on the test determines how much you studied for that test? Or is it the case that how much you studied for that test determines the score you got? Clearly, it's the case that how much you studied is what determines what score you got. So therefore, your input, in this case, input, would be hours studied, which would also be your independent variable, and your output would be score on the test, which is your dependent variable, right? So let's say in order to organize this information better, you wanted to plot a graph. So we're going to review graphing a function. Hopefully we remember back from Unit 1, graphing on the coordinate plane, right? Remember that we have a vertical axis, that's the one going up and down, that's the y-axis. And we have a horizontal axis, that's the one going from left to right, that's the x-axis. So the x-axis, in general, really almost always, this is just by convention, the x-axis we use for the input. We use for the input, where the values on the x-axis will be the values of the independent variable. The values for the x-axis will be the values of the independent variable, and the y-axis we use to plot the output. So of course that means the values of the y-axis are used to plot the dependent variable, okay? So, and each point, each x comma y point on this graph will be one of these data points where the x value, or the first value in that ordered pair, represents the input, and the second value, the y value in the ordered pair, represents the corresponding output. So let's plot the values of our dependent variable first. What were the values of our dependent variable? Those are all the values for the hours studied. So we had 0 hours studied, we had 1 hour studied, 2 hours studied, 3 hours studied, 4 hours studied, and 5 hours studied. So the values of our independent variable, or our input, are now plotted on the x-axis. So now we'll plot the values of our output of our dependent variable on the y-axis. So what were the values of our dependent variable? There was one score of 45, there was a score of 60, there was a score of 70, there was a score of 85, there was a score of 90, right? And finally, there was the perfect score of 100. Okay, so now we have our independent and our dependent variables plotted. So let's graph our data points now. Let's graph data point 1 for the first person who studied for 0 hours and got a score of 45. We would graph this right here. We would look at our x-axis to find the input of 0, and we would then go up to our output of 45. And this point is described by the ordered pair 0, comma, 45. Let's plot our second data point. That person studied for 1 hour and got a score of 60. So that data point is plotted right here. This is data point 2, and it is described by the ordered pair 1, comma 60. Let's look at our third data point, someone who studied for 2 hours and got a score of 70. So we look at our x-axis and find the 2. Then we go up to our output, which was 70, and here's our third ordered pair, described by our third data point is right here, and it is described by the ordered pair 2, comma 70. So I'm just going to go through and fill out the rest. We have 3, comma 85, right? 3, comma 85. We have 4, comma 90. 4, I can write this a little better, 4, comma 90. And finally, our last data point is 5, comma 100. And so we don't need to draw a line between them because these are just data points. There's no line in between them yet. We're just plotting each individual of the 5 data points. So this is how you can plot a graph as a function. And remember that the x value is always going to correspond to the input, and the y value is going to correspond to the output. And the actual points that we mark on the graph, which are graphed by taking the input for the x value and then the output for the y value. Remember, those are called data points, okay? So this guy right here, this is data point 1, representing the person whose input of hours studied was 0 and whose output of their test score was 45. This data point here would be data point 4, right? This data point here would be data point 4 because this represents the 4th person right here, right? Whose input was 3 hours of study time and their output was a score of 85.